I've always felt like being a founder in the Seattle ecosystem is harder than it should be. But just because something's a problem doesn't mean that it's a big enough pain or opportunity that it's really worth your time or can sustain a business model or sort of create a flywheel that can work on its own.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Aviel Ginzburg as our guest. Aviel is the founder of Seattle Foundations, a shared workspace that supports tech founders by surrounding them with fellow entrepreneurs and gives them access to events and private founder circles to spur transparent discussion about the highs and lows of building a startup. If you're someone interested in the Seattle startup ecosystem, mentorship, and community building, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to Aviel today. We can't wait to learn more from him. Let's get to it. I'm so excited to talk to you today. It's going to be a lot of fun to dig in. Thank you for coming on to the Shift AI podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right. Okay, so at the beginning of this show, I always read back your work background because it is a show about the future of work. And so I'm going to do that for you. And you started your career as a founder, and you were the founder of Timelope. I'll let you kind of dig into it, but it was a data company that kind of eventually led to other data things that you did in the future. That's been a theme for you. You then became the software development engineer at Aperture, which was acquired. And then you've co-founded Simply Measured, which eventually, after a long time, 8 years, was acquired by Sprout Social. And so you've had this kind of career of founding companies and being part of early stage companies. And then after that, you went to Techstars. And I think a lot of people know you for this role when you were the managing director, Amazon's Alexa Accelerator, and helped a lot of other founders along their journey. And then from there, you were and currently are general partner, venture partner at Founders Co-op. I guess you're the general partner now.
I tend to do a lot of things all at once. I think I was a venture partner at Founders Co-op while I was at Simply Measured, and I was a general partner at Founders Co-op while I was a managing director at Techstars. I can't do just one thing at once, unfortunately.
That's awesome. Well, now, and I love this about your LinkedIn profile. Now you're listed as the janitor in Foundations. And we're going to talk about Foundations because it's a lot of people are talking about it these days. You were recording this during Seattle AI Week. And I know that you've been getting a lot of buzz in GeekWire and also just, in other places about what you're doing. I'm really excited about that. And I think it's an interesting time to be talking about that given what's happened with Techstars. But did I get everything right in terms of the timeline? Was that pretty close?
I think you nailed it with the caveat that I added, which was a lot of those things were overlapping where, I started being part of Techstars back in 2011. That was the first year that I was one of the 3 members of the selection committee. I was always super active in that, unofficially ran some Techstars programs, even when I wasn't the named MD, and did a lot of these things at once. So I think I have always had my hands a little bit, one hand in the entrepreneurial founder world and the other hand in the sort of, I don't necessarily want to call it VC world, but it's this mixture of early stage mentorship and investment as well.
We've known each other for a while. And when I think about the Seattle startup ecosystem, I think about Andy Sack, I think about Chris DeVore, and I think about you. You've been around such a long time supporting founders. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about growing up? And did you have parents that were entrepreneurs? Like, what was that like at the dinner table? Was that a business discussion? Yeah, tell me about your background.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., the son of an artist, and my mother sort of ran the business side of things. But no, my parents were not entrepreneurs, but I got to spend a tremendous amount of time in my childhood with entrepreneurs, politicians, celebrities, world leaders. So at, the period of time when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, my dad had sort of placed himself right in the middle of the scene in Washington, D.C. So the house that I grew up in was bizarrely the Jordanian embassy residence that my dad purchased from Jordan, and sort of viewed the house as a mixture of my home and a venue. So there was an event at my house almost every night of the week, whether it was some senator's fundraiser, some nonprofit fundraiser, or some other party. And it sort of was this beautiful mix of, well, it's this beautiful house built for entertaining that's filled with my dad's art, which is for sale, by the way. And it's also this pristine and perfect environment to host large dinner parties. So I didn't grow up in anything close to what would have been a traditional home. In fact, until I was maybe 7 or 8, I wasn't allowed in some of the rooms on the first floor without supervision, just because of how they were set up. So I'd say because of that, the dinner table conversations were not about entrepreneurship, but I was immersed in all those conversations. My parents would put a cute little suit on me or just a polo shirt and bring me around, introduce me to people. And I mean, I was having conversations. I was grilling, heads of state on decisions they were making as a precocious 10-year-old. So, I mean, I would say not being afraid of taking risks and challenges and wanting to put something into the world to dent the world is something that I very much grew up with. And my dad absolutely did not want me to be an artist. I in college took a brief detour into film, and I think that probably took 20 years off of my dad's life. So
he was clear about that. Well, that sounds like a really interesting upbringing. What was the first job that you had? And was it in Washington, D.C., your first job where you actually got a paycheck?
Yeah, my first job for a paycheck, I got between my junior and senior year of high school. So my school always did this awesome thing where we would take the AP Bio class and they would get to apply to actually present at a real conference with a study that the teacher led and we would do over and over. And we'd always apply with the same thing. It would never actually get admitted. And so I worked on it and I actually ended up designing like a beautiful visual design of this professional looking presentation that we submitted, and it got accepted. And I got the attention of one of the sort of someone who came into the class as an advisor who ran the Center for Functional and Molecular Imaging at Georgetown University. And he was like, hey, we need a new website and you're into bio. Do you want like an internship to come in? And so that actually really quickly turned into my first job. And I did more than the website. I was learning how to work with like new programming languages, working with like actual functional MRI data. So yeah, my first job as a 17-year-old was working summers 40 hours a week for $15 an hour, which I negotiated, writing software that I had no business being in that, but I just talked my way into it.
That's a pretty cool first job, I must say. There's a lot of guests that come on the show, like, Kirby Winfield's first job was like hawking strawberry shortcake at the summer fair. That's a lot different than that.
Yeah, I think we all learn different lessons from those different jobs. I think there's areas where I think
nothing against strawberry shortcake.
No,
if you're listening, Kirby, nothing against strawberry shortcake.
Yeah,
that's really, really interesting. Well, I appreciate that context. I also want to touch on some of the data stuff that you've done over the years, because I think that's kind of led to the way that you've thought about incubating entrepreneurs too. I mean, it all kind of comes together. Will you just talk a little bit about Simply Measured and about some of the other stuff that you had done as a co-founder, and then we'll dive into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I think I've always been fascinated by data and sort of data as an exhaust of humans. And, it started with the first, quote unquote company that I built, which you mentioned, Timelope, which was about taking all of your clickstream data, so your own in your browser, being able to share it with others, share journeys, create journeys, and find insights in all of those paths and patterns. And then Simply Measured, which I co-founded, was all around social data. And why I was so fascinated in building that business is that you could just look at this data and say, there are insights here. There are things that could help people make better decisions, that could change how they do their job, could change the campaigns that they run. And so, in fact, Simply Measured was actually incorporated as untitled startup with the simple mandate of using social data to build solutions for marketers and PR professionals. It was not actually fully determined about what exactly is the product going to look like, how are we going to do that, but just fundamentally believed that the fact that the interactions of humans were now online, were in this API accessible form, meant that there was a whole new world of opportunity and in terms of solutions that could be built on top of that. And so that's something that has always been compelling to me. And even when I did my first job as a software engineer at Aperture, was actually doing ETL processes to try to take HIPAA compliant data and combine it with a traditional CRM so that you could run a marketing campaign that could be like, hey, people with type 1 diabetes in New Jersey who currently have this LifeScan device but have not updated in 18 months, I want them to see this specific email. And just stuff like that, for some reason, using data to make better decisions has always fascinated me.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Well, I have to ask you this just because it's been on everyone's mind. And I think a lot of people in the startup community in Seattle were surprised by this, but maybe you weren't. But when Techstars announced that they were leaving Seattle, it really was kind of an end of an era for
Yeah.
organizations like that. Now, there still are some amazing organizations in Seattle that help founders, AI2, Madrona Labs, and Pioneer Square Labs, and so on. But that was kind of a big deal for a lot of people. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what's your perspective on what happened, as much as you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I want to go back in time to what Techstars did for Seattle when it first came. It served as this organizing principle, the central nervous system for the community to engage with each other. It was not an accelerator. So much of the value was the people who served as mentors, them reconnecting with each other, spending time with each other. It was early stage folks getting to meet people later in their career. It was, a fact of the sort of the energy that comes from him. It was Gary Tanner who quoted it, of just the power that happens when ambitious people are in a physical space working together. And so that sort of was what the founding Techstars did. And then it also had the added benefit of, at that point in time, there really was not a lot of capital and sort of startup visibility within the ecosystem. So it helped organize what was a small community and then connect it to the rest of the world, to the Bay Area, to New York, to everywhere else. And, frankly, over time, what it did, and it changed, right? If you look at the early classes, it was almost everyone was from Seattle, or it was someone who wanted to move Seattle to start their company. And over time, it transitioned more into like, no, it's a place where you come in and just get to engage with some of the active community. Seattle's great at, B2B software, at e-commerce, other things. Come on in, hang out here. And additionally, the original Techstars was fully funded by the community. So it was the mentors and local VCs who were spending time were the actual ones who were getting the equity investment in all of the companies that were part of it. And so that went away. The regional focus went away. And, not all of these things went away on purpose. It's like as YC became more accessible, as, Zoom starts to exist, the difference between being an accelerator down the street versus YC on Zoom is not that different. And so I think there was just a drift over time about what is this serving for the community. And I think it sort of reached a point where what it was doing is it was serving the value for Techstars. It was looking like every other Techstars accelerator, which is supposed to be, we use local mentors to get founders to come work inside of this ecosystem, and we take equity. And we don't really give those mentors anything, but they still do it for some reason. And then we don't care where those companies go after, but we hope they're successful so that we earn equity. But you're doing it from I think with your heart in the right place. Like, by no means is it something that's malicious, but it was a Techstars program. Whereas the initial one was a Seattle program to sort of incubate early stage entrepreneurs and sort of use that incubation as a foil for other people to connect. Because a lot of times what I would see is, mentors would come in, or people who'd never really met each other, but they just met the same company. And their icebreaker was talking about where they agreed or disagreed about what that company was doing or what they needed. And there's this immediate connection because you're like, and we're both mentoring that company. So now we both know each other and we have this bond. It was just this amazing organizing principle for the city. And so, as time went on, we lost a lot of those things. And so when Techstars went away, it was not a surprise for me. And in fact, we reached a point where Chris and I were sort of exhausted in having to explain to people that, well, it still had the same name and was run by great people. It was still a very different program than what it was initially. And in my opinion, while it was solving a problem, it was not solving the problem that Seattle actually had. So while my initial reaction was anger, it was also like, look, I've been trying to get them to do things differently for 7 or 8 years. Part of why we stepped away was because we just couldn't do the fight anymore. We tried everything that we possibly could, and we just couldn't continue. And so it immediately went from anger to excitement, because I think, as we all know, when something goes away, it leaves an opportunity for something else to come in. And I actually deal with this all the time with founders that I work with who have some executive or a co-founder who isn't working out, and they're so worried about what happens when the person leaves the company. I'm like, you should have done this a long time ago, because you are just going to be amazed by how other people fill in those gaps and how much more efficient you become.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Well, it's the perfect segue. So to talk about foundations and what you were thinking. So in many ways, you've been thinking about this for a long time, and now this is the culmination of a lot of ideas. Talk to the audience a little bit about this and about how you're thinking about bringing people together. It's really quite the moment when everybody's working from home to try to manufacture some of these serendipitous moments. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been thinking about it? And you're a co-founder, so you've got partners as well. How are all you guys are thinking about it?
Yeah, so I'll talk about sort of where this started. So obviously, it's something that's been on my mind for a while. I helped create Venture Out, and that was something that was super passionate. I was passionate about as well. I've always felt like being a founder in the Seattle ecosystem is harder than it should be. But just because something's a problem doesn't mean that it's a big enough pain or opportunity that it's really worth your time or can sustain a business model or sort of create a flywheel that can work on its own. So with Techstars leaving, there was a group called Cloud Zero that had been using the Techstars space for just co-working. It was, supposed to be just on Thursdays, but people started coming Wednesdays, Fridays. One of the organizers of that was a founder I had previously backed. And I was like, hey, what are you doing in here? And he told me about what they were doing. I was like, can I mentor some of the people that are here? Like, who are folks who would love to learn? So I want to give back. So I got to meet the other guys who run it, Art and Ryan, and I was really enjoying spending time there. In fact, one person who I started talking to, I'd meet with on a monthly basis. He just finished up YC, and it's just been so fun. And it's great because good mentorship is not about, I don't just spend time with people that I have some economic interest in. And I think people can be so transactional and they forget how important just giving first, spending time with good people, it gives you energy, how important that really is. So after Techstars told them they couldn't use the space anymore, I said, hey, this can't go away. And not only that, I think this really can be something that's much more. So I said, how about we start kicking around some ideas for what we can do with a separate physical space and what this could look like. And so we came up with several ideas and iterations, some crazy, some wild, but like any good startup, what we did was started talking to a lot of people with the general thesis that it kind of sucks being a founder in Seattle in comparison to being a founder in the Bay Area right now. That's just our premise. And so what can we do to fix that? And we have a hunch that a physical space is part of what's required. So in chatting with hundreds of people, we found that people sort of fell into these three different buckets. The first bucket is, hey, I'm just starting out. And that could be someone who's just quit Amazon or Microsoft for their first startup, or that could be somebody who just came back from YC after graduating UW, raised $2 million from somebody in the Bay, and they're looking for where's their home, where's their community up here, because they didn't raise from any local VCs, so they don't have their brethren up here. Then there's a whole host of folks they're the builders. They're building a seed-funded Series A, Series B, Series C company, which is now hybrid or fully remote. And they have a need for a physical space sometimes. And you know what? They're never going to go back to the way it was before because a lot of them, they've got kids. Between work and kids, they don't have time for networking. They don't have time to be around other people. But sometimes they really crave the energy and the connection and the serendipity of talking with other people who maybe have done it before. Or sometimes you can learn something by giving to someone else who hasn't before. It can remind you something of what you knew, but you already forgot. Because as we do this more and more, we get jaded. I mean, one thing that's so ridiculous about being a VC is constantly checking yourself to say, just pass on something because you failed at it before, because sooner or later you'll stop investing in anything at all. But so there's that segment. And then there's another segment of the folks who I think were the traditional Techstars mentors. These are the folks who are exited, managing public companies. They've moved on in the career. They don't have an office themselves, but sometimes they would like to have an office space for a meeting or some activity. They would like to give back to the community, but without sort of the structured Techstars mentorship that was just a handed binder of come in for these 3 hours. We handpick people for you. It's going to be worth your time. They don't really know where to start and don't know how to do it. And so you combine all those things together, and a really obvious answer became, how do we create a physical space that gets all of these people in, but in for different reasons? Some people will want to be in every day. Some people will maybe want to be in 4 hours every week or every other week. And someone may just say, hey, I'm retired. I'm over on Mercer Island, but you know what? I'm going in on Thursday night for, dinner in downtown. I would love to do an hour fireside chat and stop by before and do that. Happy to make that work. And so how can we create something that's in a space that's convenient and not a destination where all this can happen? And so that's sort of the foundation of foundations, is the idea that we can create a space and rhythms that sort of generationally connect everyone in the region who is on their entrepreneurial journey, whether it's day one or it's, day one of boating and vacation homes.
It's the perfect time to be thinking about this in a lot of ways, given everyone's different challenges around going into the office and everyone's different patterns about how they work. And so I love that we're doing this episode, because it really is about a different way of working and a future of work that's just so different than it was pre-pandemic. It really matters what the programming is going to be like and how people are going to engage at different moments in time. So yeah, please elaborate.
Yeah, and so I think what you pointed out there is, I think it's a super unique moment in time, because I think we've sort of seen the ramifications of COVID and this transition towards remote and hybrid work. And I don't think sort of the original Techstars, the original accelerator model actually works anymore. And in fact, the past several years of Techstars programs have been a bit chaotic, because you either sort of need, everyone in or no one in and remote. Like, sort of the weird mixture has sort of messed up the energy. And so the thesis here is, how can you create rhythms for each of those buckets of individuals that sort of matches what their desire is for being in a physical location? And then around that, have enough people and enough sort of interactions and engagements that foster serendipity, or, folks who, again, are retired, but still would like to have a flexible office space. And so on top of all of that, we're going to layer in weekly founder talks and stories, a weekly demo day, and then we're also going to host some, broader events that are open to the general community. So look, like, I think a lot of this could change. We could do more of this, we could do less, but what we're really fundamentally trying to do is start with enough that it gets these three groups of folks engaging in the same physical space. That's really all that matters, because that's what we believe creates the flywheel that brings back what we saw in those early days of Techstars Seattle. And to be clear, like, when that program was running, there was this space in South Lake Union called the Easy, which had an event space in the bottom. It had some office spaces and a large co-working space. Techstars ran in it. You didn't know who was renting a desk, who wasn't renting a desk. No one really cared. The bills just got paid one way or the other. People came in and out, and it was just this amazing place that so much of who I met in my career was from people that worked in that space. And a lot of those folks are still friends and mentors today. And it just feels like a shame that doesn't exist. And I think one point to be clear here is that the goal of this is for this space to not just feel this way, but actually be owned by the community and the members. So the actual plan is to give equity in the entity, which may end up being worthless because we still are sort of iterating on what's a sustainable business model, to all of the members. And when we think about, even the VCs who are going to be involved as well, the folks who are, it's not the VC firm that just suddenly has access. It's the specific VCs who are, really actively engaged in the early stage community that get a key fob, because this is you too. This is supposed to be for absolutely everyone who wants Seattle to be a great place to build. And that means the folks who are writing code, that means the people who are dialing for dollars, and that means the folks who are writing the checks as well.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. It's really, really exciting. And it's such a good time to be doing this. I mean, given that there's some voids that you're trying to fill, but also just the energy around this new technology and AI and startups coming out of the woodwork. And so I think it's really, really exciting. Where do you think this is going to be?
I actually know where it's going to be because we have officially signed the lease. So it's going to be on the corner of Pine and Boylston, about 5,000 square feet, functionally overlooking Linda's. And I deeply believe it's sort of that Pine Pike corridor from the Starbucks Roastery through 12th. What I want it to feel like when you're there is like the serendipity that happens when you visit SF, where it's not just if you're in the foundation space that you could run into someone or have a conversation, but I want you to be at a coffee shop in the neighborhood and say, like, oh, we haven't seen each other in 6 months. Let's spend 15 minutes together. Okay, now we've reconnected. What are you working on? And so I would love for that to happen. There's a dual mission here, which is connecting the ecosystem, but then also recognizing that we need to do that with physical presence and starting with a space, but really can't just be a space. It needs to be
it's a
part of the
it's a
community.
neighborhood. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know that I always ask questions on this show about mentorship, but for this episode, it's particularly important given all the stuff that you've done as a mentor. But the question is, when you think back over your career, who are the individuals that come to mind as really influential on you and your businesses?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say the first I had in my career was Chris Hahn, who was the CTO of Aperture. And when he hired me, I was a terrible engineer. Like, I was a hacker. I didn't know what I was doing, but he trusted me. He believed in me. He knew I was reading coding books and practicing in the evenings, but he saw something in me, and he was just so giving with his time to help me work through problems and learn how to really build something, both as a software engineer as well as an entrepreneur, because he would let me in on his insecurities, on his challenges. I mean, I remember one day where he told me, I've just been dealing with this funk, and I think what has transitioned for me is, for the first time, feel like I am working for my own company now rather than like I am the company. And I was just like, that didn't even make sense to me. Like, first thing I was like, what do you mean that you are the company? And then what do you mean you work for the company? You're the boss. And just all of these things conceptually, this like 22-year-old software engineer didn't understand. And so he was incredibly influential. And then, no surprise, it was Andy Sack and Chris DeVore were the first who just gave me a desk, gave me belief, gave me money, introduced me to people. And really, one thing that was super fascinating for the first few years of Techstars, the selection committee was Andy Sack and Greg Gottesman were the sort of the main selection committee. But as you might imagine, that doesn't work because that's two people. How do you overrule? So Andy had the great idea of saying, well, we need an entrepreneur representative. And they both agreed that should be me. So that was young me in my career getting to interview every company. And we're talking like, Remitly, Outreach, all that. I remember Matt Oppenheimer will still talk about how afraid he was of me grilling him from across the table. And so just to be given that trust to be able to do that was pretty amazing and empowering for me in my career. Yeah. And I think it is weird to say that, the first company I worked at was funded by the person, Chris, who's my mentor, who I'm now a partner with. So my whole career has just been wrapped in that.
That's awesome. Well, I like to end the show with a question, and I do this for everybody. So in 2 words, how do you describe the future of work with all the AI and automation and things that are going on right now, and your insights around bringing people together? 2 words to describe the future of work.
What excites me the most about the future of work in terms of what can be automated is the ability to take away repeatable tasks. If you think about the first waves of software, we're all about making those like repeatable, time-consuming tasks a thing of the past. And now what we're able to do with AI is we're able to take that up one more level. And I think there's a place for people in terms of creativity, in terms of strategy. And if we up level sort of the ability for software and AI to take care of other things for us, we will find new things to do. And I think like it will look more like creative and strategic work. And so for me, I think that makes the world less lonely, because I think it's people spending less time on their laptop, just totally locked in being like, I just have to get this done. I have to get this done. It's like I've got agents who are currently doing that for me, and we're all here collaborating in this hopefully physical room together, talking about the work it's just delivered to us. It turned us all into, I don't want to say managers because it's the wrong word, because when you think about managers manage, people and, have a bad connotation to it, but sort of the managers of work, where technology has automatically done the work for us. And now we get to be the critic, we get to be the editor, and we get to be the creative director. And to me, that's a really exciting thing and creates a much less lonely world.
Yeah, I love it. Not lonely. It's a very human sentiment in the way that the media has been portraying all of this AI stuff, either on one end where the AI is going to take over the world, or on the other, they're going to take all our jobs. And I love that sentiment that it's coming together and being more human with each other that is going to make for more wonderful businesses and startups. And so I'm inspired. I'm excited about Foundations and what's going to come. How do people reach out to you? How do they get in touch?
You right now can email me at info or Aviel at seattlefoundations.org. And I hope by the time that this is posted, we will have our full website up and you'll be able to subscribe and hear more information. We're hoping to start rolling things out later in the summer, at the latest early fall. But we want to move as quickly as possible because you would not believe the people that are coming out of the woodwork saying, where is this? I want this to exist now. And the support that we've gotten from the community has been fantastic. And I just want to reiterate again, what we're doing here is something that we're not doing for the community. We're starting it for the community, but it's something that's going to be by the community, owned by the community, and the direction that it will go will be driven by where the community wants to go. So one thing that we're doing right now is in the process of talking to people to form the board, which should be representative of all those different categories. And it's going to be the board's job to figure out how we iterate and how we allocate capital in service of that mission, which is that we need to make Seattle a place where people across all of the stages of their entrepreneurial journey are connected to one another. And if we can do that, we can make this a great place to build a business.
Well, I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you and your partners, but I'm also really excited for Seattle. So Aviel, I really appreciate having you on the show. And, I want to have you back at some point when this thing is up and running and we can talk
I'll tell you
all
the lessons of all the mistakes that we made.
Well, thank you again, Aviel. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Aviel Ginzburg as our guest on today's episode. Aviel brings a unique perspective on how to build a supportive and collaborative environment for tech founders. If you want to stay connected to Aviel, you can find him on LinkedIn and X. And if you're interested in his insights on entrepreneurship, community building, and supporting startups, definitely connect with him and keep up with his posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we are grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.